Alright, welcome everybody again. For those of you who are just joining on the line now, we are going to kick things off now. Like I said before, we have had a great interest in these sessions, and we're thrilled that Chess Kids has been able to sponsor them and get these sessions provided free of charge for schools all over Australia. We've had over 80 schools register to take part in these webinars, and you can see on your screen now the Chess Kids website, which has got information about all of the coaching programs and competitions that Chess Kids runs. So thanks to Chess Kids for supporting this initiative, and hopefully it becomes something that's incredibly useful for schools and chess clubs all over the place. If you are here for the first time on a webinar, you can interact with us through the chat box, and you can type in questions or ask questions about the lesson as we go through, and that will help me while I'm presenting a lesson to know a little bit more about what you guys know and whether you're actually understanding all of the concepts and things that we're talking about. So we're going to kick things off today with a famous game that was played, and I actually came across this game while we were preparing for the bicentennial celebration back in 1988, and we did some chess in some parks, and we needed to find a very famous Australian game, and we came across this game that was played between two players, both of whom were Australian champions, a guy called Goldsmith and Esling. Now, this game was played back in 1895, and these two players are possibly the most attacking players that you will ever see. This game is a real example, an illustration of the style of chess that they like to play. Everything's about attacking. They're not going to take any opportunity to defend. They're always going to try and stay on the front foot, and that's something that for everybody who's playing is a good thing to keep in mind, even if you're just starting out. If you're attacking, if you're threatening your opponent, you're putting them under a bit more pressure, and there's more chance that they're going to make mistakes, and you're actually going to come out on top. So here we go. We're starting off the game. Goldsmith was white, and like I said, this is from 1895, and his first move was to advance his pawn to the center of the board. And straight away that should give you guys some clues about some famous strategies that we should be following in every game of chess that you play. So the first strategy that you should always be aiming for is the strategy of controlling the center of the board. So when you start a game, you've got a whole chessboard. You can go anywhere on the board. You can go to the left or the right. Where is the best part of the board to attack? And the answer is always the center of the board. So these four squares that I've highlighted in the center of the board are the most important area of the chessboard to control. If you're in the center of the board, from there you find that you can attack to the left, to the right, you can attack straight ahead, and you can also retreat your pieces back to your side of the board quite quickly. And it's much quicker to retreat or attack from the middle of the board than it is if you've got all your pieces up on the edge of the board. So if you've got your pieces piled along the side of the board, it's going to be extremely difficult to attack all the way to, for example, the other side of the board over here. Okay, it's just too far for all your pieces. So the number one strategy, the first thing that you should be aiming for, is to zoom straight away into the middle of the board, and that's what, in fact, both players have done in this game, advancing their pawns to the middle of the board. All right, Goldsmith's second move, he develops his knight, and you can see he's using that knight to threaten Black's pawn. Now, that's not really the main reason that he moved that knight there. The reason that he moved there is for a strategic reason, and I guess we've got to sort of start thinking about the two different aspects of chess. One is strategy, and the other one is tactics. So a strategy is an idea. It's the sort of long-term goal that you're aiming for, and when you're thinking about strategies, you're not really thinking about what your opponent's trying to do. You're only thinking about your moves. So the strategy here that Goldsmith's following when he's moving his knight off the back row is to try and get it's what we call developing your pieces, to try and just get a piece off the back row. All of these pieces that start off on the back row, right, we've got all these pieces along the back row here, when they're sitting on the back row, they can't reach your opponent's pieces, they can't do anything. So we like to say that they're all fast asleep, they're not really awake, they're not really participating in the attack. So your second strategy after controlling the middle of the board is to try and get all of these pieces from the back row off the back row and into the attack. Now what you'll find is as soon as you get a piece off the back row and into the attack, straight away it will start to threaten your opponent's pieces, and you don't even have to plan that out. You just find that as your pieces get into better and better positions, you're attacking more and more of your opponent's pieces. All right, black's advancing here with a pawn and sets up what we call here a pawn chain. We've got one pawn, protects another pawn, protects another pawn. So that formation we call a pawn chain, and that's a pretty good defensive formation. Everything's well protected there. So if the knight tries to capture this pawn, black's got a pawn there waiting to take him back. Right, the most attacking formation though for your pawns is to have two pawns next to each other in the center of the board. Okay, so we have two pawns next to each other. We call this a pawn wall, and a wall of pawns is your strongest attacking formation, because from here, when you've got two pawns next to each other, you actually find that you attack 1, 2, 3, 4 squares all in front of those pawns. So the difference is you can see white's got the wall of pawns, the two pawns next to each other, and it's covering all 4 of the squares in front of him, whereas black with the pawn chain is only attacking those 2 squares and the squares a bit further behind. So it's easy for white to attack along the white squares in between the pawn chain, but there is no in between of a pawn wall. So your pawn wall is your most attacking formation, and if you can get a pawn wall and keep a pawn wall, you're going to try and aim for that in every game that you play. All right, black's move. Black advanced pawn to f5. Now, if anybody out there has got some suggestions about what they think about that move, whether that's a good move or a bad move, feel free to type those into your chat box. We do want to try and get as much audience participation as possible. So type into your chat box what you think about moving that pawn forwards there. Okay, we've got some people who think it's a good move, but we need to know also why. So what's the good thing about that move, and what's the bad things about that move? Because really every move that you play is going to have some good and some bad about that move. There's no, really, unless it's checkmate, there's no moves that are going to be all entirely good. So good things about that move is we've set up a pawn chain, a pawn wall, just like we talked about for white. We can get two pawns next to each other, so a pawn wall. So we've got black now, the two pawns next to each other, so that's a really strong formation, a good attacking formation. You can see that the pawn is threatening to take one of white's pawns, so that's another good thing. But the bad thing about that move is that it opens up the weak spot. So this square that I've highlighted red here, this F7 square, we call that the weak spot, because that's the square that is protected by the king but no other pieces, and that's the easiest place to attack if you want to try and get your opponent in checkmate early on, is to aim towards the weak spot, and black's now, by moving that pawn forwards, opened up his weak spot and left his king a little bit vulnerable. Alright, so what's white going to do to start attacking? Well, white plays pawn takes pawn, and black doesn't want to just recapture that pawn, because if black takes this pawn back, white's knight can just take it. So that doesn't work out well for black. He ends up losing a pawn. He thinks, oh, well, I could take that pawn back and now we're back to even. But there's a little trick that happens here where black now loses his rook. White does queen takes queen, king takes queen, and the knight comes here with this strategy where the knight is attacking two pieces at the same time, and we call that one a fork. All right, so the knight's threatening the king, it's threatening the rook. All right, so that's a lot of moves ahead, but if we step back to here, black actually considered all of those moves from this position. So before black played the move, black's already thinking 3, 4, 5 steps ahead to try and work out what's going to happen. And goes, well, I don't want to get white into a good position and have him attacking me. So instead, he plays pawn takes pawn on e4, And when he plays pawn takes pawn, he's now threatening white's knight. Now remember, at the start of this game I said both of these players are really aggressive attacking players. They don't want to play any moves that are going to put them on the back foot, that are going to make them defensive. They're only wanting to play moves which are attacking, threatening moves. All right, so black's attacking white's knight. White doesn't really want to retreat the knight. He wants to find a way of attacking even more, and every move that he plays is going to be attacking. So with his move he plays knight to g5, and when he moves his knight out to g5, he's threatening pawn, and he's also aiming down towards that weak spot, that square right next to the king, which is the easiest place to come through and deliver a checkmate. All right, so he's using his knight to get into as an attacking position as possible. Now, it is possible here for black to do pawn takes pawn, but he didn't do that move. So can anyone tell me why black didn't want to do pawn takes pawn here? Because it looks like, well, there's a pawn, can take another pawn, and I guess when you're starting out particularly, most people sort of think, well, if there's something that can be taken, let's take it. So anybody who wants to type into their chat box why you wouldn't do pawn takes pawn, do that now and let us know what you think that white has in mind if black does pawn takes pawn. All right, and we've got a good answer from Mark there. He's going to do the same thing as what we saw before. After the pawn takes the pawn, white's queen will come down and take black's queen. No choice for black but to take it back. And then that's left him open for the tactic, which is tactics are moves which you think about your moves and your opponent's moves. And we see the tactic here where the knight moves in and gets a fork, attacking the king and attacking the rook at the same time. So a fork is where one piece is attacking two pieces at the same time. Black's king's in danger, black's rook's in danger, and black only has one move. So you have one move, you choose to save the king, which is of course the most important piece, and then your rook gets captured. So you can't avoid losing material. Of course, if you've got a bigger army than your opponent, you're going to have a better chance of winning the game. So back here, black doesn't do pawn takes pawn. Like we saw, he's going to fall for a fork. He's going to lose his rook if that happens. So instead, he does pawn to d5 and advancing his pawn forwards, controlling the center more, backing up his other pawn, so his other pawn can't get taken. A very strong move there, getting control over the center of the board. All right, white plays pawn to e6. Now you can see what his plan is straight away. The pawn is now protecting the weak spot. Remember that square there, the red square that I've highlighted, the easiest place to attack. The pawn's now protecting it, so that next move, white can move his knight in onto the weak spot, and again, the same threat that we had from before. He's going to be attacking two pieces at the same time, this time the queen and the rook. So he's faced with a fork. Now, black has some ways to defend that. He can protect that weak spot a bit more if he wants to, but he wants to really focus, instead of defense, on attack. So he plays an attacking move, bishop to c5, putting his bishop down towards white's weak spot. All right, so if black's got a weak spot, white's got a weak spot. They start off with the same position, the same army. So we can see here that this square here that we've highlighted red now for white, the f2 square, is protected by white's king, but no other piece can cover that square. All right, so that's going to be the easiest place for black to break through. Now, by putting the bishop there and attacking the weak spot, that sort of thwarts white's plan, because if white moves his knight in onto the weak spot, as he originally intended, setting up an attack on the queen and on the rook. All right, so we've got the fork there, two pieces attacked. Black calmly moves his queen out of the way, and if white's knight takes the rook, it doesn't work out so well for white. He wins the rook, he gets an extra piece, but black's queen can come down onto the weak spot, now protected by this bishop, and that delivers a checkmate. All right, so white's king's now in check, can't take the queen, can't put anything in the way to block it off, can't move his king anywhere, and that's it, that'll be game over. All right, so we have to step back a few moves, and white has to be a bit careful when it's here. The bishop comes out attacking the weak spot, and white has to come up with a different move because he doesn't want to end up getting checkmated. All right, so he doesn't move his knight in. Instead, he plays knight to c3, which is a developing move. So what he's trying to do is get more of his pieces off the back row. So at the start of the game, we saw that all the pieces that were on the back row were weak, or not doing anything. So we're trying to get all our pieces off the back row. He's now got his knight and his queen attacking straight into the middle of the board. Right, black plays queen f6, and you can see what black's threatening straight away. Queen's threatening to take the pawn on the weak spot and put white into checkmate. Right, so we said this game was going to be attacking. So far, white's been threatening the weak spot a lot for black. Now black's trying to turn the tables and ignoring the pieces of his that are being attacked and just aiming for checkmate as quick as he can. So that's a checkmate threat. White has to stop that. I mean, it doesn't matter really how you want to play. If you're about to get checkmated, you have to do something that is going to stop that checkmate. Still doesn't want to defend. He still wants to play more attacking moves. So he comes up with this move here, bishop to b5, which puts black's king into check. All right, so the bishop's attacking the king. It says check. Now check just means look out, your king's in danger. So it's easy enough for black to stop it. It does mean that black can't do the checkmate next move, because he's got to get himself out of check. But black has a very simple way of getting his king out of check. So feel free to use your text chat to see if you can answer this question. What would you do if you were black to get out of check here? Because you're in check, you want to do the checkmate next move. You can't do it straight away. You've got to find a way to get yourself out of check first. All right, we haven't had anyone suggesting the right move yet. The three things to think about when your king's in check. The first thing is to try and take the piece that's attacking you. All right, and that's the bishop over here that's attacking your king. Well, you can't take that piece. There's no way of taking that. So let's go for the second thing. The second thing to think about is what can we do to put a piece in the way to block it off. All right, and Joy, and I'm not sure who's with Joy there, but Joy has come up with the correct move here. Thank you very much for that. The blocking move, to move your pawn forwards one step to block it off. Because once you move your pawn forwards, you've blocked off the check. At the same time, you're now threatening to take white's bishop. So that seems like a great move. You get out of check, you threaten the bishop, and white's still faced with that threat of checkmate. So now if white saves the bishop, it gets checkmated. If he saves the checkmate, he might lose the bishop. All right, next move that white does, you'll see why he wanted to move his bishop out here and not just defend against the checkmate, not just protect his weak spot. All right, remember, that's the weak spot. The square on f2 is white's weak spot. He has to get that one safe, but he wants to get that safe without playing a defensive move, but actually by every move playing an attacking move. Now, castling, this move that we see here where the king and the rook swap around, is actually an incredibly powerful move. You want to try and castle every game that you play. Not only does it get your king safe behind this barrier of pawns, you've got 3 pawns there that are sheltering your king, but mainly it gets your rook into a good attacking position. So by castling, you get your king safe, you get your rook into a good position, and you'll notice here that if the queen tries to take the pawn now, go for the checkmate, the white rook is just waiting there. So he's able to defend and do a good developing move at the same time. All right, black's got a choice here. Black can take this bishop, all right? But if he takes the bishop, we see what white's going to do, which is to move his knight into the middle of the board, take that pawn, threatening black's queen, and if black just moves the queen away to save the queen, white's knight comes in to c7, and we've seen this tactic before. If you know what it is, type it into your text box, where one piece is attacking 2 at the same time. So the knight's going to come into c7, threatening the king and the rook at the same time. Okay, so let's go back a couple of steps and say, well, hang on a second, but what if the queen, which is attacked, doesn't just move out of the way? What if the queen comes back and we use the queen to protect this square here, this c7 square? So now the knight can't go in and do a fork over there. Well, we can come up with a different move with the same tactic. And Jared's told me that the tactic is called a fork, which is absolutely correct. The knight can come into f7 now, and we have a fork again. The knight's attacking the queen, knight's attacking the rook, and black only gets one move. You can only choose to save one of those two pieces. So we step back to the position here where black was considering taking that bishop, and black actually decided not to take the bishop because he didn't want those knights of white's to come dancing in through the middle of the board and either get black onto the weak spot here or the other weak square on c7 where those knights are going to do some devastating forks. So instead black plays bishop takes pawn on e6. Okay, because once the bishop takes the pawn, there's the bishop coming back to protect black's weak spot, and white's pawn can't support the knight to go in, so it's going to be a little bit harder for white to actually break through and attack. Alright, it also leaves white's bishop under threat, so the pawn from c6, which didn't take the bishop before, could take the bishop next move, because black's bishop is supporting his pawn in the middle of the board. Alright, so we've got a few good things about that move here. Now, white saw his bishop's attacked. Goldsmith's like, well, my bishop's attacked, I'm in danger, I better get myself safe, and he moves his bishop out of the way. Now that is an unusual place to move your bishop. Right? His bishop was in danger, he's moved it out of the way, but he's put it straight back in danger. The bishop can just get taken by the pawn. Right? Seems like crazy. Why would you move your bishop out of the frying pan and into the fire? You're straight in danger with another pawn. But it's actually a very clever move, because if the pawn takes the bishop, again, it's not so much about the fact that his bishop's lost, but what can white do next, which is to get this knight in here, and we have, again, a fork, where the queen's in danger and the bishop's in danger. All right, so we've got two pieces threatened, and black can't save them both. You can only choose to save one of those two pieces. All right, so we step back here, and black just ignores the fact that he could take the bishop. He just wants to focus on attack, 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 attack. So he throws his pawns forwards one step, and he's going to use this pawn to attack here, to attack the knight, not that one, to attack the knight, to attack the pawn on the weak spot and try and break through. So he's got his bishop, his pawn, his queen, everything's lining up on that weak spot there, try and break through and get towards, and get in towards white's king. So e3 for black is an excellent move. Moved his pawn forwards, and he's got a bit of a threat here. All right, white plays knight now to e4. Wow, crazy move, crazy move. He's threatening the queen, but he's leaving his knight in danger from the pawn. He's leaving his bishop in danger from the pawn, and he's completely ignored the attacking move that black just played. All right, same thing, we've got to think a couple of steps ahead, and we say, well, what's going to happen if the pawn just takes the knight? Well, if the pawn takes the knight, black now loses his bishop here. The bishop's protecting this, threatening a few things. Mainly the knight's going to be coming in here onto c7, and he's going to be aiming for yet another fork. So this game is all about white trying to get his knights in and aiming for these nasty forks where he can threaten two pieces at the same time. All right, so let's step back and see what happens. All right, after black played pawn takes pawn, and then the knight takes the pawn here, where he's now threatened with this fork. The knight's going to come in there and attack the king and the rook. Black continues with his attack. He plays pawn takes pawn, check. Now, white just moves his king into the corner here, and black's pawn has actually turned traitor, because before this bishop was attacking, this queen was attacking, black had a few pieces that were hoping to come through and attack white's king. Now that the pawn's here, the queen's blocked by the pawn, the bishop's blocked by the pawn, so white's actually using that pawn of black's to line up, these three pawns that are in front of his king, to use those pawns as defense against any pieces that black tries to come through and attack with. All right, so clever way for white to use black's pieces for defense. Right, black's bishop's in danger, and for the first time in the game, black retreats. Okay, he drops his bishop back 1 square to stop the knight coming onto that square for a fork. Right? So he's stopping the fork and retreating his bishop. Now the first retreating move of the game, and now white moves in for the kill. And he plays rook takes pawn, threatening the queen, leaving himself open to the bishop. But if the bishop takes, then there's a checkmate in 2 moves. So we don't want to take that one. We can also do knight in here, check, which would be a very nasty fork again. All right, so let's just go back here. So he's leaving his rook in danger, threatening the queen. Oh, sorry, I've done that in the wrong order. Before he's taken that one, he's first gone in for the queen here. He's brought his bishop into the attack here, threatening the queen, protected by the knight. Black gets his queen out of the way, and then he sacrifices his rook there, getting his rook into the attack, leaving it open for the bishop, because if the bishop takes it, then he's got the checkmate in 2 moves with the queen coming in, protected by the knight. And you can see that very quickly white's going to have a lot of pieces: the rook, the knight, the bishop, the other bishop, the queen, an awful lot of pieces attacking right down towards black's king. And the difference is that black's king has no pawns in front of it. He hasn't castled, whereas white's king, sitting in the corner of the board, is a lot safer because it's protected by that wall of pawns. Right, black plays knight develops to d7, right? Leaving his knight to d7, stopping the rook coming down. That's not checkmate because the knight could just take it. And Goldsmith comes up with a brilliant combination here, sacrificing his queen to just get rid of the last defensive piece around black's king, and then all of white's pieces will come in for a checkmate. So he does queen takes knight, sacrificing his queen, allowing his queen to be taken, because now white's king has got no pieces near it, and white's still got a bishop, knight, bishop, rook, 4 good pieces that can come and attack the king. And the 5th piece, he plays rook to d1, so now every single one of white's pieces has joined in the attack. All 5 of them are aiming straight down towards the king. All right, black's in check. Not much he can do to get out of check. This can't take the rook. He can block with the bishop, but the bishop just gets taken. So he just moves his king out of the way. Next move for white, nearly game over. Plays rook down check. Again, can't take the rook. The only thing he can do is block. He drops his queen back to block, which just gets taken. Still can't move his king anywhere. Knight's covering this square here. So the only thing that can happen is a block. And then the final move for Goldsmith is rook down here, and that's checkmate. So we've got the check with the rook. King can't move forwards because the knight's covering it. And just look at all of the pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces that white has, all pointing in straight towards black's king. And all of black's pieces sitting on the back row, and those pieces that are sitting on the back row couldn't even hope to attack white's king. So there's quite a few things that we saw in that game, quite a few both strategies and tactics. The strategies are the things that you're planning for yourself when you're ignoring your opponent, and the tactics are the ones where you're thinking about what your opponent's up to as well. So if anyone's got any questions, we're going to be sticking around for a little while to answer any questions that people have. This will be available online as well for people who want to review this lesson again at a later time, and you'll get an email with a link that you can go to watch this again. So if you've got friends in your school or other people who'd like to have a bit of a listen to this lesson and learn some of those strategies that we saw today, feel free to share that around, and you guys can check the same lesson out at a later time. So final revision, the strategies that we saw white controlling the center of the board, we saw white getting all of his pieces attacking, right, every single piece off the back row and attacking, and we saw white with castling, getting his king nice and safe. So those 3 strategies really helped white. And then we saw some tactics, we saw some great moves where white was aiming for 2 pieces at the same time, and thanks to Jared from before for remembering that that was called a fork, where one piece is attacking 2 at the same time. So that's the lesson for today. We look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks very much for your attendance, and thanks to Chess Kids for sponsoring this lesson once again. If anyone would like to play some games and you don't have kids at your school, I don't know, we might have some very small schools out there with only a few people and you don't have anybody to play against, on the Chess Kids website we've got a link, play.chesskids.com.au. When you click on that link, that takes you to a website where you can play games of chess against other players free of charge. So it's live. It's an opportunity to play live games against other people. Some schools do find that their firewalls block that site and you find it a little bit difficult to log in, but you can encourage your players to do that from home. Once you sign in, you'll have a list of players who are on the site, and anybody can jump on and play games against one another. There's usually a lot of people there in the evenings. You can see we've only got a couple of people here now. You just click on somebody's name and say invite for a game, and you guys can play live games against one another there. If you do have troubles from school, players, you can do that from home. There's usually 15 or 20 people on there of any afternoon or evening after school time, and yeah, just jump on and play some games. So that's free for anyone to use. Okay, that's it from me. Like I said, if you've got any questions, we're going to be sticking around for a little while. Thanks very much.